Welcome to Cut to the Crypto, brought to you by Unstoppable Domains. I'm Tony Karen Brown, and I'm your host. This is your 15 minutes of crypto, asked and answered. Hi, today I am joined by Mac Reddin, CEO of Commsor. Mac, thank you so much for giving some time out of your busy schedule.
Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who are not familiar with Commsor, and I'm going to do my best description, so feel free to add to it. Commsor is a full stack company providing other companies with software, resources, education to unlock what you all call the full potential of community-led growth. And it feels important to maybe hold that term, community-led growth, because I think we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But what did I miss in that description, Mac?
No, that was pretty spot on. Actually, that's more eloquent and concise than I think I would do it myself. So I'm just going to have you do it in the future.
Amazing. That sounds like a plan. So to add some context before we dive into this week's question, as a novice, everywhere I look, there seems to be a new NFT drop or a new NFT project like happening every single week. And there's something that I've been interested about, or something that I found curious, is these NFT projects seem to transcend all industries, and they seem to be popping up in just about every sector. And we've mentioned on this podcast in previous episodes briefly the concept of NFTs, but we actually haven't dug into really. So that's why I'm excited to dig into this concept with you a little bit more today. And before we go to the question, I wanted to highlight three things that I've noticed, and maybe you've got something to add to this, Mac. But the first thing I've noticed is there seems to be a lot of different types of NFTs, which is something I hadn't realized. Whether that's music, whether that's art, collectibles, membership fees, entry fees, you name it. The second thing seems to be that at its core, it seems to be about creating value in things that inherently shouldn't really have value attached to it, which obviously creates excitement, interest, curiosity, and obviously plenty of hype, which is great for like the marketing point of view of an NFT. And then the third thing, which I think is what we're going to dig into today, is this common thread of community building. Something that you and I feel like have been talking for the last 2 or 3 years, this concept of community building. So that's the point I wanted to get into. And before I ask my question, is there anything else that's top of mind for you when you want to like describe or talk about NFTs and this like emergence of this new concept?
No, I think once again, I think you hit the nail right on the head.
I see.
I'll just sit back and let you talk.
Okay, so let's get to the meat of it. You recently launched as Commsor a whole new project, which was this collection of NFTs called Commsor, S-A-U-R, like dinosaur.
Just to make it really confusing, right? Because it sounds the same.
Really confusing. There you go. It's the French version of Commsor. What was your thinking behind such a project? And maybe a more pessimistic / naive way of asking this is, why is a software company, and I'm loath to call you a software company because you're so much more than that, but for the purpose of this question, why is a software company launching an NFT project? And what was the decision behind this?
Yeah, for us, like you said, we're so much more than a software company. We're a community company, as we like to say. Yeah. And obviously, community is a bigger part of anything in Web3 or NFTs than it has ever been in any other industry. Like I love when you look at these like NFT projects, and there's like, they have the team page, right? And there's always like the artist, the developer, and the community manager. It's like 3 equal pillars that go into these projects in ways that, you don't have startups that start with a community manager. They hire that as maybe their 20th employee, maybe their 100th employee, but it's a day one pillar in all these projects. Yeah. And as someone who's been building community in a more, I guess what you'd call traditional Web2 world for the past few years, as Web3 picked up steam and NFTs and whatnot, I've been hearing Web3 this and Web3 that and NFTs this, and when are you guys going to do this? And so for us, we started exploring it, I guess probably 6-7 months ago, just digging into what does community in a Web3 space mean? What does it look like? Because I had no idea, honestly. I kind of fit the stereotype for who should have been into crypto for the past 5 years, but I really did nothing with it until 6-7 months ago. Mostly because I was interested in exploring what this community thing meant. And my original interest was actually, were there things that Web2 community builders could learn from the way that people were building community in Web3? So we actually were going to launch this project last year at like the peak of the kind of NFT hype cycle. And then as that kind of fell apart, we were like, just launching an NFT project for the sake of launching an NFT project to learn isn't enough anymore. So we kind of went back to the drawing board. And I guess for context, we run a community called the Community Club, which is like one of, if not the largest and most active communities in the world for professional community builders, with job boards and resources and events and content, all these things that help community managers in the Web2 world be better at their jobs, find camaraderie, things like that. So the idea is really, can we take that and also build that and provide that in the Web3 world and start to build this bridge where we can bring Web2 people in, get them to mint their first NFT ever, experience that. And once again, bridge that gap with education for where are there things that Web2 builders can learn from Web3 builders, and where are there things that Web3 builders can learn from Web2 builders. So unlike a lot of NFT projects that are very standalone, they're like, hey, buy an NFT and like maybe it goes up in value, maybe it doesn't, maybe we do some cool stuff with it, maybe we don't. And that's, I think, the common kind of negative feedback into NFTs is it's rife with scams and get rich quick schemes and things that are sometimes hard to follow. We're really using the Commsor, the Dino NFT, as like a way for community builders to experiment with community building in a Web3 world, because the best way to learn is to do it. So we suspect that the vast majority of people that are going to be minting this NFT, or I guess who have, because by the time this podcast episode comes out, we will have minted it already, will be folks who very likely will be minting their first NFT ever. And we're going to bring them together and learn together about what community building in Web3 means.
Do you think we're going to see more companies launch these types of projects? And I know that's a yes or no question, so I'll make it a little bit more interesting. Are we going to see more companies do this? And if so, what do you think is going to be the spark, or what needs to be the spark to actually go, you know what, this actually makes sense for us as a tech company or a software company to actually create such a project?
I mean, first off, now we see that Salesforce is launching NFT and Web3 infrastructure stuff. And if they're doing it, we've already crossed the chasm to some degree, right?
Yeah.
I think right now we're in a little bit of a Wild West time period, kind of like early internet, where everyone's just trying things. Some of it's working. Some of it's definitely intentionally scammy. Some of it doesn't work unintentionally. And I think we'll see a movement away from just like, here's some art, buy it. Maybe it goes up in value. Like people look at Bored Apes and CryptoPunks like, wow, I bought it. And like, yeah, it's part of like a social club, I guess. But like the real value is that this ape you bought for $1,000 is now worth $200,000.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see brands get into the space more and more and move away from the financial aspect heavily and move more into like the community ownership and the community involvement side of things. So I think we'll see NFTs used as things like event passes, or like you see, like on old school forums, you get like a badge for having been an active member for 2 years. So I think it starts to become a little bit more of that type of thing rather than a financial instrument. I think right now we are, as I said, in this Wild West where I'm not going to name names, but there are definitely brands that launch projects and you're like, there's no substance behind it. They're clearly feeling FOMO. They want to launch an NFT thing. They don't really know what it means. And I think where it gets really interesting is where brands will be able to tie some form of Web3 element back to some sort of Web2 element. Right now, it feels very siloed. You kind of have like, it's a Web3 project or it's a Web2 project. And I'm very interested by, I guess, what folks have been calling Web 2.5, which is like, can you blend them into one thing that actually provides value through community ownership versus speculation on asset value?
So you've now just thrown a wrench in there, because I was just wrapping my head around Web 2 and Web 3. And those of you who, and again, like add your value into this, because I've just been learning all about this. But for those of you who are probably wondering as you're listening to this, what the hell is Web 2 and what the hell is Web 3? Web 2 is obviously the web that we're using today. It is about interactivity, it's about user-generated content. And what I'm starting to understand is Web 3 is absolutely about this decentralization away from the big tech companies. But it's also been described as a way for artists and creators to potentially own not only the stuff that they're creating and building on all of these different platforms, but actually own the platform itself, which I thought was really interesting. And then this idea of the ownership economy comes up. And last year we heard about the creator economy and the passion economy, and now there's this thing called the ownership economy. So, and now you've just thrown in a wrench of Web 2.5. Why is there value on there being this bridge between the two worlds? And I know you've touched upon it a little bit, but why it feels counterintuitive if there's a new Web 3 coming, shouldn't we be focusing all our efforts there? Or is this a way of like potentially bridging that gap and getting more people into the space ever so slightly?
Yeah, I think it's I'm trying to keep it a short answer, but it's I think it's like you look at Web 1 versus Web 2, right? Web 1 was like the early websites. I mean, before I was involved in the internet, I'm not old enough to have been a real heavy Web 1 user, admittedly. But it wasn't like Web 2 came along and replaced it. Web 2 built on top of it and augmented it, and there are elements of both. So I think it's like there are some people right now that are like Web 3 maximalists that are like, Web 2 is dead, Web 3 is the future. And I think realistically, you end up with this blending. So I think one of my favorite examples actually is there's a group called LinksDAO.
Okay.
And they sold these NFT passes. It's a golf theme. I mean, I'm not into golf at all.
Okay.
And I almost bought one just because it's a cool idea and I wanted to be a part of it. But they're basically creating a modern day country club, a golf club, where you have to be a member. You buy the NFT. The NFT acts as the initial funding to build the club, as well as your membership pass to it. But now you can buy and sell those passes and transfer your membership without necessarily having to go through like a centralized club approval process or anything like that, right? Like if you become a member of a traditional country club right now, you just stop being a member. There's no value in you having like built up the membership there, versus with this, the idea is that you could theoretically sell your membership. So like it's collectively owned by the community versus a central authority who's like, they might sell me a membership, they might sell you a membership, but there's no actual connection between those two.
Between the two of us.
So like they're using the Web3 technology to power a very non-Web3, non-internet at all thing.
Yeah.
And it's early. Like, and I think Gary Vee, love him or hate him, is doing the same with like a private dining restaurant in New York. Yes. They're going to do this like really cool omakase sushi restaurant. So there's a lot of interesting experiments. And that's like the Wild West phase. We're in this experimentation phase. And yeah, there's so much crap out there. But look at like what the web was in 1999. 99% of that has not survived today, but it still set a foundation for things to come through and build upon. And
changed the way we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. It's interesting. It's a question I hadn't actually thought of, but listening to you speak you mentioned this idea, obviously, of being part of something and this concept of membership. And what I've heard a lot when talking with people in Web3 is this idea of being a part of a community and lowering that barrier to entry and getting more people involved. But then at the same time, it feels like there's still, gatekeeping is the wrong word, but it's like you have to be invited, or how do you get in? So I'm curious if that's anything of top of mind for you, of just when we think about all of these ideas of being a part and being a member and being invited, how do you ensure that NFTs and all of these projects actually open those gates and open those doors more widely versus doing the complete opposite? And is that something that you've been thinking about when you think about community building, which is absolutely in that vein?
I think this is true of any type of community building, Web2, Web3, in-person, physical, digital, whatever it might be. Like the best communities find the best way to walk a very fine line between inclusivity and exclusivity, right? If you're building for everyone, you're kind of building for no one. But if you're really, really restrictive on how exclusive you are, you're also not going to really do what you need to do. And there's also a spectrum. There are some projects, like maybe LinksDAO only needs 1,000 people to buy into those things, and that's it. Like maybe it is true, more country club-esque, it is exclusive, versus there are projects that are more open, that have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people involved in them. So it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I think it depends about finding what that right threshold is depending on the community, because there's different answers for all of them.
But it's not a cop-out, really, because what I liked about that is community building, regardless if you're doing it wherever you're doing, on whatever web you're doing it, in person or not, it is that same fine line. So what's interesting here is, it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is the goal and the aim is still community building. And now today, there are all of these other creative ways that we can go about it versus the traditional ways that we've been doing it. And that feels like that's where your excitement lies. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of interesting potential. And I think there is a little bit of danger of, this is Web2 and Web3, that community is becoming a little bit of buzzword. You see people slapping community. It's like, sign up for our newsletter, it's a community, or join our Discord, it's a community. And it's like, just because you created a space doesn't mean you've built a community, right? And there's a lot of, I think, education. That's actually like the whole purpose of our project, right? Is to bring this education about community building principles, regardless of what type of community you're building, to a broader set of people. Because I think there's a lot of room still for, not like professionalization of community, but not standardization. That's not the right word either. But there's like an evolution that can be happening beyond just like, let's put people together, versus like, let's put people together intentionally. And very often that intentional part is what's missing from a lot of things.
Based on what you just said there, that intentionality, the same goes with an NFT project. It can be intentionally just the thing that you buy and you then leave, like it's an actual transaction, or it can be intentionally, it's part of a wider thing, it's part of a membership club, it's part of a community, which I like that because it puts this thing on a spectrum of, there's neither right or wrong. It is on the spectrum of choices that people can pick from. Thank you so much for helping me and others understand the whole concept of community building and how NFT ties to this.
There's much more to that rabbit hole. So
yes, there is.
I hope folks dive in.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mac.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and I hope you enjoyed today's guests as much as I did. If you've got big crypto questions, send them our way and we'll attempt to get them answered for you. And for the more seasoned crypto investors and enthusiasts, do go check out our weekly podcast, The Unstoppable Podcast, to learn more about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web.